In this demo, I'm going to show you how to use the array formula to create a dashboard type product. In this demo, we're going to talk about how to make this type of a component for a dashboard. By component, I mean I have a dynamic, an interactive dynamic that is already in place. So in cell C2, I want to know the total amount of tornadoes per month for a given year. So I can select from this dropdown, let's say 1986, and you can see that the values down below from January to December update, as well as this chart over here. This chart also updates. Now, all of this data is getting pulled from this back end. You can see it here. We have the year, the total tornadoes, and how many tornadoes per month occurred. And the data goes from 1950 to 1994. And just to show you this dynamic again, you can see it automatically updates every element of it. So we're going to make this from scratch. What I'm going to have you do is just start a new sheet. You can retitle that sheet demo or anything you want to keep it for yourself. And then in cell B2, I'm going to have you type select year. And we'll go ahead and make it bold. I like to hit Control B. And that's where we're going to tell the user to select the year they're interested in. Now, in cell C2, we want to have a drop-down that allows the user to select from a range of years. Well, we have that range of years. Luckily, it's in our raw data. What we can do here is we can go to the Data tab, and we can go to Data Validation. And from any value, or from the Allow drop-down box, I can select the list. In this case, I'm going to go to the source. It wants to know, Excel would like to know where to pull that list from. So in this case, I'll click Raw Data, and we see cell A6 right here. I will hold Control, Shift, and hit down. That's going to just select everything down in the used range. So that gives us our full range of years for the user to select from. And just, it's always a good idea to test. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit this drop down, and you can see that actually all the years show up. So let's just pick one at random, make it easy. We'll pick the top one. So that's 1950. So now what we need to do is pull back the data associated from January through December for 1950. So what I like to do is kind of create a setup where the data that's getting pulled back has a place, even though it may not be what we finally see. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. But what I'll do is over here on cell E2, I'm going to type in Jan, Feb, and I'll highlight those two, and I can just drag them out to get that autofill going up until December. So that's what I want to see, and I'm going to make those centered, kind of make a mini table here, even though the user may not see this in the end. What I want here is I want for when I select 1950, I want the data associated with that to appear from January through December. So in this case, we are going to use index to find that information. So here, I'm going to say matched index, and you'll see why I do that in a second. I want to figure out what row 1950 is in. So I know it's in the top row, and if I were to pull the data from the top row, that would be easy. But I want to make it dynamic. So I need to figure out where 1950 is along this list. Based off of previous videos, you might say, well, how about we use match, right? Because match allows us to look up a value, and then it returns the location of that. So let's see how one would do that here. In this case, the lookup value is C2. I'll click that. And then I'm going to go to the lookup array. That's on our raw table. So I'll start with A6. Remember, Control-Shift down. Highlight that whole thing. I'll hit F4 to lock it in. And then I'm going to say I want it to be an exact match. So that's 0 right there. We'll close it out. I'll hit Enter. You see it matched in the first place. And as I change it, we can see that dynamic is actually working as expected. Now, the next thing I want to know is the data that's associated with that result. So, for the 13th record, how do I get this data over here? Now, since I used match, we're not going to use VLOOKUP. But I can use what we know about match to our advantage. So here in cell E3, I'm going to type in equals index, and then I'm going to go back to the raw data to get our data set. In this case, I'm only interested in the data set. I'm not interested in the headers. So I'm going to select that whole thing. I'll hit F4 to lock it in. I'm going to hit comma to take us to the next part of the index function, which is what it's looking for as a row value. So we know what that row value is. It's this matched item right here. So I'm going to select that. Now we need to know the columns that we're interested in. Well, here's a really neat trick with index. I'm going to leave this blank. Just to show it to you that it's blank, I'll hit space. It doesn't really matter. We could go without it. But I'm going to close this parenthesis. So I've actually not put anything in that column space. And you see it comes back with a 37. If I drag this all the way out here, it comes back with some kind of weird, goofy data. We don't really know what to make of it. This is where an array formula is useful. So remember, array formulas return more than one cell. And to use an array formula correctly, what you do is you type in what it's going to look like. In this case, that's exactly what we did. So I've typed it in here. The next thing you do is you drag it all the way out to the size of what you expect to be returned. So in this case, we want to return 12 values. Now, usually once you've done that, you've dragged it out, it's going to have errors in it. So to tell Excel that you want this to be an array formula, after it's already sized correctly, you can go up into the formula bar. It doesn't really matter where you click. And then you can hold Control, you can hold Shift and press Enter, and now you see it's returning the values that you want. And in addition, you see up in the formula bar there are these little curly brackets. That means Excel has recognized that this is in fact an array function. And I'm just going to center this just to make it look a little bit better. This means that as I change the year that I've selected, it's going to update accordingly. And it's always a good idea just to double check. So let's just double check. I'm going to select 1950 because that's easy. The starting value should be 7/20/21. I'll go back to the raw data. We'll scroll all the way up. We see it's 7, 20, and 21. Now, when you test it on your own, make sure to test more than the top one. So here's something to think about. You see that I used match for this index number right here. Now, behind the scenes, when Excel uses a match function, what it does is it goes through each value to be matched. So it says, is this one it? No. Is this one it? No. Is this one it? No. And it'll keep doing that until it finds a match. In computer science, we can describe this as having a certain amount of operations. So in the worst case scenario, it will have n operations, right? It's going to check for matches n amount of times. So what's that n? Well, n is going to be the max value because in the worst case, right, the value is on the bottom that it's looking for. Now here, the effect is not very significant, but we should always be thinking about things like that. And in fact, here's a great time to think outside the cell because we don't need to match something up. We already understand this set of values. 1953 is the third value between 1950, right? Or I should say it's the fourth value, excuse me. 1953 is the fourth value between 1950 and 1994. So we don't actually need match. We just need a way to map that 1953 into being the fourth value. And so instead of having to look through 4 values to find the answer, what if it didn't have to look through any values? What if it could just figure it out based off of the number that we provided? Well, indeed it can. We just need to get a little clever about it. We need to think outside the cell. So I'm going to hit delete here in cell C3. You see there's nothing here anymore. And also, I just want to point this out. You see that there's still values pulling from here. This is because index treats 1 and 0 as the same for that first row. Why it does that, I couldn't tell you. But if you don't put anything in there, it's always going to pull from the top. In this case, we want 1953 to pull back the fourth item. So what we can do here is, we know the max, right? The maximum of that range. We know we can find it out. I can go here to cell A6, that's the top of it, Control-Shift down to get the full range. I'll hit close parenthesis here. So that comes back as 1994. That's not what we want. So what we can do first is we can subtract 1994 from 1953. You're going to see that gets us a huge range, 41. That's not the fourth. So what do we need to do to get the fourth item in? Well, finally what we need to do is take this number and subtract it from the full count. And we can do that. I'll click in cell C3, and I'm going to click right after that equal sign because I want to add something in here. So I'll type in count. You can use a count A if you'd like. Count works as well. I'll type in count and go back to the raw data. Select cell A6 through A50, close it out, and then we're going to subtract that from the full amount. And as you can see, that's not really what we want. So what's going on here? Well, we know we have the count here. So I'm just going to hit F9 like we did before, just so we can think about this. And we have the max in this case. We have the min. So what are we missing? Well, what we want is we want to subtract 1994 from 1953, and we want that entire value subtracted from 45 in this case. So I'm going to hit escape. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to just put parentheses around the max and the C2. That makes sure that the operation happens first. So I'll hit enter now, and you see it comes back as a 4. So this was kind of a clever way of getting the same effect without using match at all. And the reason you'd want to do this is if you had a series of matches, Excel can do this calculation that we've shown here in cell C3 much faster. It doesn't have to look through and amounts every single time. So the effect is not significant here, but keep that in mind. This is a way to think outside the cell. In addition, there's another concern you should think about. Now, as I've built this in cell C3, it's not quite clear what's going on. A match actually would make it a lot more clear. So here's a decision you need to make between formula readability and formula speed. In this case, the speed was not a big deal, so you may get by with match. It's really up to you, but I wanted to show you that there are different ways to think about this problem, and we should always be looking for shortcuts. Now let's go back to the problem. So in this case, I want to show all this data here on a chart. So what I can do is I can select cell E2 all the way through P3. And I'll click insert, and I'm going to insert a line chart. You can insert a column chart if you want. It's really up to you. So let me just show you. As I change these values, this chart changes. Well, I don't particularly like that this chart title doesn't change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go up to the formula bar until I see a blinking sign. I'll click into it, and once we get the blinking cursor, I'm going to hit equals. And I'm going to select cell C2 because that is actually what I wanted to show, the year. So I'll hit enter, and you can see it's showing 1961. That's the year we're interested in. As I make changes, it changes as well. And this follows the theme that we've been developing so far, that everything is sort of living in our document. As one change happens, it flows through naturally to the presentation. There's no VBA involved. So the next thing that we need to do is take all this data here, and we want to actually show it on the side, as we did here, right? That actually looks a lot better. Unfortunately, this is how our data looks. It looks horizontal. It does not go vertical. So we need to go from horizontal to vertical. So in Excel, there's actually a mathematical function that allows us to do that. And it's usually for when you're multiplying matrices. That function is transpose. In this case, we're just going to use it for its visualization feature of changing data that goes from horizontal to vertical. So here, I'm going to type in transpose, and watch how this actually follows the same dynamic of using array formulas as I did earlier. So we'll type in transpose, open parenthesis. In this case, we have a cell array or a cell range that is 2 rows by 12 columns. So the result we want needs to be 2 columns by 12 rows. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this entire thing, noting that it's 2 rows, 12 columns, and you can see that 2R by C12 showed up. Let me try to do that again. So E2 through P3, you see it showed 2R by 12C, so 2 rows by 12 columns. I'm going to close that out, that function. So I'll hit close parenthesis and hit enter. Now you see cell B6 has a value error. Remember, when you're using array formulas, those are often expected because Excel doesn't know what to do. Excel is saying, you selected a region that's more than one cell. I don't know what to do with this one cell. So what we need to do is next size this return range. It's the size of the value that we expect to return. So in this case, I'm dragged B6 through C6. That's going to get me my 2 columns. Now I need to get 12 rows. Now, unfortunately, there's not a really easy way to do this. You kind of just have to eyeball it or count as you go. So we have 4 here. So I just counted in my head. I went to 12. Now you see that we have a ton of value errors. That's okay. We expect that when we're working with array formulas. We need to tell Excel to activate the array formula. So hopefully you remember the final step when working with array formulas. I'm going to go up here into this formula bar, and I'm going to hold Control, I'm going to hold Shift, I'm going to hit Enter, and you can see that it returned the values. Now, I must have miscounted. You can see that it didn't return everything. Now, I'm going to show you that if I try to drag it down once more, it's going to say it's not going to give me the response that I want. But what I can do here is I can go back in. So now that I've dragged it out, I can go back to the top and hit Control-Shift-Enter again, and now you see it returns the values that I want. So let's go back up here to our original dynamic. I'm going to select cell C2. I'm going to change it to 1975. You can see that it changed immediately. Now we see everything is working as expected. There's one thing I don't really like, though. I don't like all this back-end junk here. We don't want the user to see that. So here's what we need to do. We do plan on hiding this information. Now, I'm just going to show you what happens if I hide it very quickly. That chart kind of smashes up, and I don't actually like that very much. So I'll hit Control-Z and undo it. The first thing I want to do is make sure that that chart does not get smaller. So the way I can do that is, with the chart selected, I can go up to this Format tab, and I can hit this tiny little triangle over here under Size. And you see that brings up the chart area options. Now, alternatively, if you're in Excel 2010, it's going to bring up the options dialog box, and you'll see that there's a properties heading. And what you'll do, whether you're in 2016 as I am or 2010 before, is you're going to click Don't Move or Size with Cells, and that's going to keep it from resizing as we hide stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide all this data here. And you're going to see it's going to actually cause another issue, which we'll fix in 1 second. So I'll click Hide. I've selected E through P. I've right-clicked. I'm going to click Hide here. Oh, look, our data has disappeared. Well, we don't really like that either. So what I can do is right-click. I'll click Select Data. And then here in this tiny little button on this dialog box that pops up, you'll see it says Hidden and Empty Cells. Click that. And then what you'll do here within this even smaller box is click Show Data in Hidden Rows and Columns. So I'll hit Enter, or I'll hit OK. I'm going to hit OK again. And you see that this sort of looks how we would like it to. But then there are some things I don't particularly like from a style perspective. So I'm going to fix those up because they're going to annoy me. So I'm going to right-click on this axis, and I'm going to click Format Axis. And instead of having the data between tick marks, I want it to be on the tick marks. And then what I want to do is I don't really think that these lines help with anything, so I'm going to select those. I'll hit delete there. And then I'm going to select the plot area. So this is my favorite type of design. And I'll go to Shape Outline from the Format tab, and I'll select a medium color. And those of you who are keen to observe, you can see that this thin line on this axis is actually a little lighter. That's because this axis also has a line associated to it. So with that axis selected, from on the Format tab, I'll go to the Shape Outline, and I'm just going to click No Outline, and that's going to give the plot area outline precedence. And finally, I don't really like this border around the table, so I'll click on that. And from the Format tab, I'm going to go to the Shape Outline. You can see no fill on the border has already been selected. If it's not selected on yours, you're going to click down, and you can click No Outline. Or I should have said that that is no outline already selected. Now, we have all these grid lines around here. Kind of looks tacky with everything else. So I'm going to select a free cell. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go to the View tab, and then here where it says Grid Lines, I'm going to check that off. And that's going to give me a kind of a cleaner look. I'm going to tighten things up, maybe make this a little smaller. And remember that no longer does this move with cells, so you're going to have to move it on its own. And finally, I don't really like this matched index here, so I'll right-click on cell 3. I'll click Hide here. We don't have to worry about changing anything. then it's always a good idea to let your user know that there's some form of input. So I'll select cell B2 through C6. I'm going to create a border here. And now you see our dynamic is working. We've built this component of a dashboard. I say this is a component because this is something you can reuse on different dashboards. We can think of it in terms of a component, that this is not a free set thing where we can have completed this dynamic. No, instead, we can actually use this type of dynamic of looking up rows and showing data on multiple charts to work across different data visualizations and different dynamic interactive activities. And look how quickly we've made this. We've not used one line of code.